What I'm going to share with you is something most people would never believe. And honestly, I wouldn't believe it myself if it hadn't happened to me directly. A Sasquatch saved my life in the Cascade Mountains. Not just saved me either, but spoke to me, communicated in clear words I could understand, and what that creature told me about the world, about people, about everything we think we know. It shattered every assumption I'd ever held about reality. My name is Rebecca, and I've been a wildlife photographer for 15 years, specializing in remote wilderness documentation. I'm someone who relies on evidence, on what my camera captures, on tangible proof. But after 3 weeks stranded in the backcountry with a being that science says cannot exist, being nursed back from the edge of death by hands that weren't human, I've had to rebuild my entire understanding of what's real and what isn't. It all started during a solo expedition in early October. The mountains were putting on their annual display, the maples turning brilliant shades of orange and crimson, while the evergreens stood dark and ancient against the changing landscape. There's a quality to the air that time of year that's hard to describe, sharp and clean, carrying the scent of decaying leaves and approaching winter. I was about 4 days into a 10-day trip, documenting the migration patterns of elk through a particularly remote valley that few people ever visit. The terrain in that region is unforgiving. All steep inclines covered in scree, narrow ridges with drops on both sides, and creek crossings that can go from ankle-deep to chest-high, depending on recent rainfall. I'd been hiking since before dawn that morning, trying to reach a particular meadow where I'd seen elk congregating during a previous expedition. The route required traversing a series of rocky outcroppings, and I was moving carefully, testing each foothold before committing my weight. My camera bag was heavy on my back, probably heavier than it should have been, but I'd brought extra lenses and equipment because the light in that valley during autumn is something special, the kind of golden quality that makes every shot look like a painting. I was about 2/3 of the way across a particularly tricky section when I made the mistake that nearly killed me. There was a flat-looking rock that seemed stable, and I stepped onto it without testing it first. The moment my full weight landed, the rock shifted, sliding out from under me like it had been waiting for exactly that moment. My ankle twisted sharply to the right, and suddenly I was falling, tumbling down a slope that seemed to go on forever. I grabbed at bushes and rocks as I fell, but nothing held. My equipment bag was throwing off my balance, making every rotation more violent than the last. The fall ended abruptly when I slammed into a boulder at the bottom of a small gorge. I heard something crack, felt an explosion of pain in my left leg that was so intense my vision went completely white. I lay there, gasping, unable to process anything except the agony radiating from my lower body. When the initial shock subsided enough for me to think, I tried to assess my situation. My left leg was clearly broken. The bone had snapped about halfway between my knee and ankle, and I could see the unnatural angle even through my pants. My right ankle was swelling rapidly, probably sprained badly, maybe fractured too. I'd landed in a narrow gorge, maybe 15 feet below the traverse I'd been attempting, with sheer rock walls on both sides and a small creek running through the bottom. I managed to pull my satellite phone from my vest pocket, but the screen was cracked, the device completely dead from the impact. My backup radio was in my bag, which had torn open during the fall, scattering its contents across the rocks. I could see the radio about 20 feet away, wedged between two boulders. 20 feet might as well have been 20 miles given my condition. Moving my left leg even slightly caused waves of nausea-inducing pain. My right ankle wouldn't support any weight at all. I was stranded at the bottom of a gorge in one of the most remote sections of the Cascades, with no way to call for help and no way to move. The first thing I did was try to calm down and think logically. Panic would kill me faster than my injuries. I took stock of what I had within reach: My camera bag had stayed attached to me, which meant I had some protein bars, a small water bottle, and my emergency first aid kit. Not much, but something. I dragged myself toward the creek, using my arms to pull my body across the rocky ground while keeping my legs as still as possible. Every movement was agony, but I needed water, and I needed to clean the cuts and scrapes I'd accumulated during the fall. It took me probably 45 minutes to cover the 10 feet to the creek. By the time I reached it, I was shaking from pain and exhaustion. I filled my water bottle and drank deeply, then used some of the water to wash the blood off my hands and face. My first aid kit had some basic supplies: gauze, antiseptic wipes, a few bandages, painkillers. I took 3 ibuprofen, knowing they wouldn't touch the pain from a broken leg, but hoping they'd help with the inflammation. The sun was starting to sink below the ridgeline, and the temperature in the gorge was dropping fast. Mountain gorges lose heat quickly once the sun disappears, the rock walls that provide shade during the day becoming cold radiators at night. I needed shelter, needed to get off the bare rock before I lost too much body heat. There was a small overhang about 15 feet upstream, a place where the rock wall jutted out enough to provide some protection from the elements. Getting there seemed impossible, but staying where I was meant certain hypothermia. I started the agonizing process of pulling myself upstream, using my arms to drag my body across the slick rocks while trying to keep my broken leg immobilized. The pain was constant and overwhelming, a white-hot lance that shot up my leg with every slight movement. I had to stop every few feet to rest and breathe through the waves of nausea. Twice, I nearly passed out, my vision going dark around the edges before I forced myself to stay conscious through sheer willpower. By the time I reached the overhang, it was nearly dark and I was trembling uncontrollably. I managed to wedge myself into a semi-protected position, my back against the rock wall, my legs stretched out in front of me. I pulled my jacket tighter around my body and tried to conserve what body heat I had left. The night stretched out before me like an eternity of suffering. My leg throbbed with a pain that seemed to have its own heartbeat. Every sound in the darkness made me flinch, made me think of bears or mountain lions, predators that would find an injured human an easy meal. I drifted in and out of consciousness, sometimes waking to complete darkness, sometimes to the grey light of pre-dawn. When morning finally came, my situation hadn't improved. If anything, it was worse. My left leg had swollen to nearly twice its normal size, the skin tight and shiny, hot to the touch even through my pants. My right ankle was purple and black with bruising, and I couldn't feel my toes on that foot anymore. The pain had settled into a constant grinding ache, punctuated by sharp spikes whenever I moved even slightly. I ate a protein bar and drank more water from the creek, trying to keep my strength up, even though I had no appetite. I spent that day trying to figure out a way to signal for help. I had a small mirror in my camera bag, and I spent hours trying to catch the sun and flash it toward the sky, hoping some aircraft might be passing overhead. Nothing came. I tried yelling for help until my throat was raw, but the gorge swallowed my voice, containing the sound between its rock walls. As the second night approached, I started to accept that I might die here. My emergency contact wouldn't expect to hear from me for another week, and even then, they'd probably wait a day or two before raising an alarm. By the time anyone started looking for me, I'd likely be dead from exposure, dehydration, or infection from my injuries. That second night was when I first heard the footsteps. They came from somewhere above the gorge, heavy and deliberate, too heavy for a deer, too rhythmic for a bear. Bears shuffle and meander. These footsteps had purpose, direction. I lay in my little alcove, barely breathing, listening as whatever was up there moved along the edge of the gorge. Then I caught a smell, something strong and wild, like a combination of musk and pine, and something organic I couldn't identify. The footsteps stopped almost directly above me. I could hear breathing, deep and slow, the breathing of something large, I pressed myself back against the rock wall, my heart pounding so hard I could feel it in my broken leg. Then the sound faded, the footsteps moving away through the forest, and I was alone again. I told myself it was a bear. Had to be a bear. What else could it be in these mountains? But the footsteps had sounded wrong for a bear, too steady, too measured. And that smell, I'd encountered bears before during my photography work, knew their particular scent, and this wasn't it. This was something else entirely. I didn't sleep much the rest of that night, every nerve in my body on high alert despite my exhaustion. The third day brought rain, a cold, steady drizzle that turned the rocks slick and filled the creek to rushing levels. My little overhang provided some protection, but I still got wet, and with the rain came a drop in temperature that had me shivering within hours. My leg was getting worse, the swelling spreading up toward my knee, the skin taking on a reddish hue that spoke of infection. Without proper medical treatment, I might lose the leg, even if I survived long enough to be rescued. The infection might spread to my bloodstream and kill me anyway. That afternoon, I heard the footsteps again. They came from the same direction as before, moving along the rim of the gorge. But this time, they stopped at a different point, somewhere behind me and to the left. I turned my head slowly, trying to see through the rain, and that's when I saw her. She was standing at the edge of the gorge, maybe 30 feet above me, looking down. The rain was falling around her in sheets, but she didn't seem to notice, standing there like a statue carved from the mountain itself. Even through the rain, I could see that she was enormous, easily 8 feet tall, maybe more. Her body was covered in dark fur, brown so deep it was almost black, matted and wet from the rain. Her shoulders were impossibly broad, her arms long and muscular, hanging past her knees. But it was her face that held my attention, flat and wide, with a heavy brow ridge over eyes that were watching me with unmistakable intelligence. I don't know how long we stared at each other. Time seemed to lose meaning in that moment, suspended between heartbeats. She tilted her head slightly, studying me the way I might study a particularly interesting bird through my camera lens. Then she turned and disappeared into the rain and trees, leaving me alone with only the sound of the falling water. I know what I saw. Despite the rain, despite the pain, despite everything, I know what I saw. It was a Sasquatch, a Bigfoot, whatever you want to call it. A creature that science says cannot exist, standing there watching me with eyes that held more awareness than any animal I've ever photographed. My rational mind tried to reject it, tried to come up with alternative explanations, but there was nothing that fit. A bear doesn't stand upright like that, doesn't have that face, doesn't move with that kind of deliberate grace. A person in a costume wouldn't be out in this remote location during a rainstorm. What I saw was real. The rain continued through the night and into the next morning. I was in bad shape by then, shivering constantly, my thoughts becoming fuzzy and confused. The infection in my leg was spreading, angry red streaks creeping up past my knee. I was running out of water because the creek had become too muddy to drink from safely, and my food was gone. I could feel my body starting to shut down, systems failing one by one as resources ran out. I must have lost consciousness at some point that morning because the next thing I remember is waking to the sensation of being moved. Strong arms were lifting me, cradling me against something warm and soft. The smell was overwhelming, that same musk and pine scent I'd detected before, but now mixed with something almost comforting, like the smell of a winter coat that's been packed away with cedar chips. I tried to open my eyes, but my eyelids felt impossibly heavy. I could feel movement, a swaying rhythm like being carried by someone walking. Then darkness took me again. When I next woke, I was somewhere dry. The constant sound of rain was muted, filtering through from somewhere outside. I was lying on something soft, bedding of some kind, and there was warmth nearby. A fire crackling somewhere to my left. I opened my eyes slowly, afraid of what I might see, but also too weak to care as much as I should have. I was in a cave. That was my first coherent thought. The walls around me were rough stone, curved like the inside of a dome, rising to a ceiling about 12 feet overhead. Light came from a small fire burning in a pit near the center of the cave, the smoke rising toward a natural opening in the roof that served as a chimney. The bedding I was lying on turned out to be a thick layer of pine branches covered with some kind of dried grass and moss, surprisingly comfortable given the circumstances. She was sitting across the fire from me, watching. The Sasquatch I'd seen at the gorge, unmistakably the same one. In the firelight, I could see her more clearly now. Her face was remarkable, not quite human, but not quite ape either, something ancient and evolved beyond both. Her eyes reflected the firelight, dark and deep, filled with an intelligence that made me feel like she was reading my thoughts. Her fur was dry now, and I could see that it was a rich chocolate brown with threads of silver around her face and down her arms, suggesting age and experience. I should have been terrified. I was alone in a cave with a creature that could probably tear me apart without effort, unable to run, unable to fight, completely helpless. But something about the way she was watching me, something about the care that had clearly gone into bringing me here and making me comfortable, made fear seem unnecessary. Whatever her intentions were, they didn't seem to be predatory. She must have seen that I was awake because she moved then, rising to her feet in one fluid motion that belied her massive size. She crossed to where I was lying and knelt beside me, bringing her face closer to mine. Up close, I could see every detail, the fine hairs that covered her skin, the lines around her eyes that suggested years of experience, the slight movement of her nostrils as she breathed in my scent. She reached out one enormous hand and touched my forehead gently, the way a mother might check a child for fever. Her touch was surprisingly soft, her skin warm and leathery. Then she spoke. The word that came out of her mouth was rough and guttural, but unmistakably a word, a human word. She said, "Water." I thought I was hallucinating at first, that the fever and pain and exhaustion had finally broken my mind completely, but then she reached beside her and picked up something, a wooden bowl filled with liquid. She helped me sit up slightly, supporting my head with one massive hand while holding the bowl to my lips with the other. The water was clean and cold and tasted like the sweetest thing I'd ever drunk. After I'd drunk my fill, she eased me back down onto the bedding and moved away to tend the fire. I lay there trying to process what had just happened. She had spoken, a single word, but a word nonetheless. A Sasquatch had looked at me, assessed my needs, and communicated using human language. Everything I thought I knew about the world, about evolution, about the boundaries between human and animal, was suddenly called into question. Over the next several hours, I drifted in and out of consciousness. Each time I woke, she was there, tending the fire or sitting quietly watching me or doing something with plants and herbs I couldn't quite make out. At some point, she came to examine my leg. She unwrapped the crude bandaging I'd fashioned days ago and studied the wound with what I can only describe as clinical interest. The infection was bad. I knew that without looking. I could feel the heat radiating from my skin, could smell the sweet, sickly smell that meant things were going wrong. She disappeared for a while after that examination. I lay alone in the cave, watching the fire burn down, wondering if she'd abandoned me. But she returned, carrying an armful of plants, things with leaves and roots and stems that I didn't recognize. She sat by the fire and began processing them, grinding some between her palms, mashing others between rocks, heating still others over the flames until they became soft and pulpy. When she was finished, she came to me with a poultice of some kind, a paste made from the plants she'd gathered. She applied it to my leg with surprising gentleness, covering the worst of the infection with the cool green mixture. It stung at first, a burning sensation that made me gasp, but then it became soothing, numbing, like ice on a sunburn. She wrapped my leg in leaves secured with strips of bark, creating a bandage that was more effective than anything I'd managed on my own. I tried to speak then, tried to say thank you, but my voice came out as a croak. She looked at me, and I saw something like understanding in her eyes. She touched her chest once, a gesture that seemed significant somehow, then went back to tending the fire. I fell asleep watching her work, wondering if I was dreaming, hoping I would wake up and find that all of this was real. Days passed in that cave. I don't know how many exactly. Time became fluid and hard to track. She cared for me with a patience and dedication that was almost maternal. She brought me water multiple times a day, always in the same wooden bowl that she must have carved herself at some point. She brought me food too, at first just berries and roots and nuts, things that were easy to eat and digest. Later, as I got stronger, she brought meat, small animals that she'd caught and cooked over the fire. The meat was gamey but nourishing, and I ate everything she gave me without question. My leg began to improve almost immediately after she started treating it. The angry red streaks faded, the swelling went down, the heat dissipated. Whatever was in that poultice, it worked better than any antibiotic I'd ever used. The infection retreated, and the bone began to knit. I could feel it healing, a strange itching sensation deep in the tissue that meant things were coming back together. As I got stronger, she started communicating more. Her vocabulary was limited but growing, and I realized that she was learning as much as she was teaching. She would point at things and say their names in her rough voice: water, fire, food, leg, pain, and watch my face to see if she had it right. I would nod or shake my head, and she would adjust accordingly. Sometimes she would try new words, testing them out, seeing how I reacted. Tree, rock, bird, sleep. I started teaching her more words in return, pointing at things and speaking slowly, watching as she worked to form the sounds with a mouth that wasn't designed for human speech. She learned quickly, faster than I would have thought possible. Within what I estimated was about a week, she could communicate basic concepts with reasonable accuracy, not sentences, not yet, but words strung together in ways that conveyed meaning. You need water. Fire, keep warm. Leg better now. But it was what she taught me that truly changed my understanding of everything. One night, after I'd been in the cave for perhaps 2 weeks, strong enough by then to sit up on my own and even hobble a few steps with a makeshift crutch she'd fashioned from a branch, she sat across from me and began to really talk, not just basic words about immediate needs, but ideas, concepts, truths that she wanted me to understand. She spoke slowly, choosing her words carefully, sometimes making up compound words or using gestures when language failed her. But the message came through clearly, despite the broken syntax. Humans, she said, pointing vaguely in a direction that I assumed meant civilization. Humans forgetting important things, old things, how to live right. I asked her what she meant, speaking slowly and simply so she could understand. She was quiet for a long moment, staring into the fire. Then she began to explain, and what she told me over the following weeks fundamentally altered my perception of humanity, of nature, of my own place in the world. There are more of them, she explained, more of her kind, scattered throughout the wild places of the world, in deep forests and remote mountains and hidden valleys. They've been here longer than humans, she said, watching from the edges, observing as human civilization rose and spread across the land. They remember when humans were different, when we lived as part of the forest rather than apart from it. They remember when we understood our place in the web of life, when we took only what we needed and gave back what we could. She told me that her people, if I can call them that, have a duty. They are caretakers, guardians of the wild places that remain. They maintain the balance between species, encourage diversity, protect the ancient ecosystems that modern humans have largely forgotten exist. They understand connections that our science is only beginning to grasp, relationships between plants and animals and soil and water that span centuries and create resilience against change. I asked her why they hide, why they don't reveal themselves and try to help us understand. She looked at me with those deep, intelligent eyes and said something that I've never forgotten. She said that long ago, when humans first began to change, to separate themselves from nature and claim dominion over it, her people tried to communicate. They tried to teach, to guide, to help humans remember what they were losing. But humans were afraid of what they didn't understand. They attacked what was different, destroyed what they couldn't control, silenced voices that challenged their growing belief that they were masters of the world rather than members of it. So her people retreated. They moved deeper into the wilderness, further from human settlements, watching and waiting. They hoped that humans would eventually remember on their own, would recognize the damage they were causing and choose a different path. But the forgetting only deepened, she said. Each generation knew less than the one before. The old knowledge, the understanding of connection and balance and responsibility faded until it was almost completely gone. She told me about the forests, about how they're not just collections of trees, but living communities, networks of relationships and exchanges that span entire mountains. The trees, she explained, talk to each other through their roots, sharing nutrients and information and warnings. The animals serve as messengers, carrying seeds and distributing nutrients, their movements choreographed by instincts that reflect millennia of evolution. Even the water has a role, carrying minerals and microbes, shaping the land through patient persistence, connecting distant places in ways humans rarely consider. I asked her how she knew all this, how her people had acquired such understanding. She said they learned by watching, by being patient, by paying attention over generations. Humans, she said, are always in a hurry. They want to understand everything quickly, to reduce it to simple explanations, to control it. But the deep truths of the natural world can't be rushed. They reveal themselves slowly, over lifetimes, over centuries, to those willing to watch and wait and listen. There was a sadness in her voice when she talked about what humans are doing to the earth. Not anger, not judgment, just a profound sorrow at watching something beautiful being destroyed. She spoke of the forests being cut, the rivers being poisoned, the air being filled with things that shouldn't be there. She talked about species disappearing, entire kinds of life winking out of existence, taking with them knowledge and relationships that could never be recovered. She described the balance being disrupted, systems that had worked for millions of years, suddenly breaking down because too many pieces had been removed. But what struck me most was that she didn't blame humans for this destruction. She saw it as a kind of collective illness, a forgetting that had spread through human culture like a disease. Humans don't know, she said. They've forgotten that they're part of everything, that what they do to the earth, they do to themselves. They think they're separate, above, in control, but they're not. They're woven into the same web as everything else, and when they tear that web, they tear themselves. I spent hours talking with her, learning her way of seeing the world. She taught me to listen to the forest, to hear the messages in bird calls and insect sounds and the creaking of branches. She showed me how to read tracks, not just as signs of animal passage, but as stories, narratives of behavior and relationship and community. She explained how to identify plants not just by their appearance, but by their role in the ecosystem, how they interacted with other species, what they contributed to the whole. One day, when I was strong enough, she led me outside the cave for the first time since she'd brought me there. We emerged onto a narrow ledge overlooking a valley I didn't recognize, dense forest stretching in every direction, mountains rising in the distance, a river glinting silver far below. The beauty of it took my breath away, not just the visual spectacle, but the sense of life, of interconnection, of purpose that seemed to emanate from every tree and rock and stream. She stood beside me, looking out at the same view, and I realized she was seeing something different from what I was seeing. Where I saw a pretty landscape, she saw a community, a vast living system with countless members all playing their parts. She pointed out things I would have missed. A particular stand of cedars that was home to a family of owls, a meadow below where elk gathered in the early morning, the shapes in the forest canopy that revealed where streams ran underground. The whole valley, she explained, was connected. Nothing existed in isolation. Everything affected everything else. We went back into the cave as the sun set, and she cooked dinner while I sat watching, trying to absorb everything I'd learned. My leg was healing well, strong enough now that I could walk short distances with just a slight limp. In a few more days, I knew I would be well enough to leave, to try to find my way back to civilization. The thought filled me with complex emotions, longing for home, mixed with reluctance to leave this place of revelation. That night, she told me what she wanted me to do. She said that she had chosen to save me for a reason, that she had been watching me for several days before my accident, had seen something in me that suggested I might be ready to hear the truth. Not everyone was ready, she explained. Most humans were too deeply asleep, too caught up in their forgetting to wake, even when shown the reality of things. But some, a few, were different. They had the capacity to remember, to understand, to help others begin the journey back toward balance. She wanted me to be a messenger, not to prove that her people existed. She emphasized that strongly. She had no desire to be discovered, to have humans invading the wild places looking for creatures to capture or study or exploit. The message wasn't about her. The message was about humanity's relationship with the natural world, about the urgent need to remember what had been forgotten before it was too late. I asked her what I should tell people, how I should share this message. She was quiet for a long time, gazing into the fire. Then she spoke, and her words were the clearest I'd ever heard from her, as if everything she'd been teaching me had been leading to this moment. She said to tell humans that they are part of a living world, not separate from it, not above it. Tell them that what they do to the earth, they do to themselves, that the health of the forests and rivers and oceans is their own health, not a separate thing to be managed or exploited, but an extension of their own bodies and spirits. Tell them that every species that disappears takes something irreplaceable with it. Knowledge and relationships and possibilities that can never be recovered. Tell them that the wild places need protection, not because they're nice to look at or good for recreation, but because they're essential. The lungs and kidneys and immune system of a living planet. Tell them, she said, that there's still time. The damage is severe, but not complete. The systems are stressed, but not broken. Healing is possible if humans choose it, if enough of them wake up and remember and start living differently. Tell them that they have a responsibility, that their intelligence and abilities are meant to be used for caretaking, not conquest, for healing, not exploitation. Tell them that they're not alone, she added. Tell them that there are others, intelligences they haven't recognized, watching and hoping. Tell them that the wild places still have their guardians, beings who remember the old ways and maintain the ancient balances. Tell them that help is available if they're willing to accept it, guidance if they're willing to listen, hope if they're willing to change. She looked at me with those deep, wise eyes, and I saw centuries of patience there, millennia of watching and waiting and hoping. I saw sadness at all that had been lost and might still be lost. But I also saw hope, fragile but persistent, the same hope that drives plants to grow through concrete and animals to adapt to changing conditions and life to persist against all odds. I asked her if she thought humans would listen. She said she didn't know. She said that humans have surprised her people before, sometimes in terrible ways and sometimes in beautiful ones. Humans have the capacity for both great destruction and great healing, she said. Which capacity prevails depends on choices, individual choices made by millions of people every day. Each choice matters, she emphasized. Each act of remembering, each gesture toward balance, each decision to take less and give more, it all matters. The accumulated weight of those choices determines the future. The next morning, she led me out of the cave and along a series of trails I never could have found on my own. We walked for most of the day, stopping to rest when my leg needed it, sharing a simple meal of dried meat and berries. By late afternoon, we had reached a ridge overlooking a valley I recognized, the same valley where my truck was parked at a trailhead about 5 miles below. She stopped at the edge of the trees and looked at me, and I realized this was where we would part. I didn't want to leave, didn't want to return to a world that suddenly seemed shallow and distracted and asleep. But I also understood that my purpose now was out there, not in the wilderness, not in hiding. My purpose was to carry her message into the human world, to do what I could to help people remember. I tried to thank her, but words seemed inadequate. She touched my face gently, her massive hand almost tender, and said something I'll never forget. She said, "You teach now. Help humans remember. We watch, we hope, we wait." Then she turned and walked back into the forest, disappearing into the shadows so quickly and completely that within seconds, I couldn't see any trace of her. I stood there for a long time, looking at the trees where she had vanished, feeling the weight of what I'd experienced and what I'd been asked to do. The hike down to the trailhead took me the rest of the afternoon, my healing leg protesting by the time I reached my truck. Everything was as I'd left it weeks ago, covered in fallen leaves but otherwise untouched. I drove to the nearest town and walked into the ranger station, and the look on the ranger's face when he saw me told me just how long I'd been gone. "Nearly 3 weeks," he said. 3 weeks since I'd failed to check in at my expected time. Search parties had been sent out, had searched the area where I was supposed to be, had found no trace. They'd been about to give up, to declare me lost. I told them a version of what happened, an edited version. I said I'd fallen, broken my leg, found shelter in a cave, managed to treat my injuries with natural remedies, and wait until I was healed enough to hike out. They accepted this explanation more or less, though they seemed puzzled by how well my leg had healed given the apparent severity of the break. The hospital x-rays confirmed that the bone had been fractured and had somehow knit back together perfectly, something the doctors said should have taken months of treatment and physical therapy. I went back to my life after that, but everything was different. The world I'd taken for granted now seemed strange and urgent. I noticed things I'd overlooked before, the ways humans interact with nature, the casual destruction that we barely even register. I saw the disconnection everywhere, in the way people moved through the world without seeing it, in the way we treat animals and plants and ecosystems as resources rather than relations. I started changing the way I worked. My photography had always been about capturing beautiful images of wildlife and wilderness, but now I understood that it could be something more. It could be a form of teaching, a way of helping people see what they were losing, what they stood to lose if they didn't change. I started including more context in my presentations, talking about ecosystems and connections and relationships, trying to help people understand that the animals and landscapes in my photos weren't just pretty pictures, but members of a community we all belong to. I also started speaking more directly about conservation, about the urgent need to protect what remains of the wild world. I gave talks at schools and community centers, at conferences and gatherings, anywhere people would listen. I told them about the forests and the rivers and the animals, about the web of connections that sustains all life, about the damage being done and the healing that's still possible. I never mentioned what really happened to me in those mountains. never spoke of the Sasquatch or the cave or the thing she taught me. As she said, most people aren't ready for that truth. They dismiss it, ridicule it, use it to undermine everything else I was trying to say. But the message itself, the core truth she wanted me to share, that I could tell, and I found that people were more receptive than I'd expected. Something is shifting in human consciousness, a growing awareness that we can't keep living the way we've been living, that the earth has limits and we're approaching them. More people are asking questions, seeking alternatives, wanting to be part of the solution rather than the problem. The seeds of change are sprouting slowly but surely. These days, I spend as much time in the wilderness as I can, not just to photograph it, but to be part of it, to remember what I learned in that cave. I've developed a sensitivity I didn't have before, an ability to feel the forest around me in a deeper way. I notice things other people miss, the subtle signs of health and illness in an ecosystem, the stories told by tracks and scat and feeding patterns, the language of birds and insects that I'm slowly learning to understand. Sometimes, when I'm deep in the backcountry, far from trails and other humans, I catch that smell. Musky and wild, pine and earth and something uniquely other. I know she's nearby then, or one of her kind, watching from the shadows, checking on the human who learned to listen. I never see them on these occasions. They're too skilled at remaining hidden, but I feel their presence, and that's enough. It reminds me that I'm not alone in this work, that there are others doing their part to maintain the balance. I've changed my entire approach to being in the world. I see everything differently now. When I walk through a forest, I'm not just moving through a collection of trees. I'm passing through a community of interconnected beings, each playing their role in a vast system of exchange and support. When I encounter animals, I don't see them as creatures separate from myself, but as relatives, fellow travelers on this planet, members of the same family of life. When I look at a river or an ocean or a mountain, I see not just scenery, but vital organs in the body of the earth, essential to the health of everything else. I've become what she asked me to become, a bridge between the human world and the wild world. In my small way, I'm teaching people to remember what they've forgotten, to see what they've overlooked, to understand what they've ignored. It's slow work, frustrating sometimes, often seeming futile in the face of the destruction that continues all around us. But I keep going because I remember what she told me, that each choice matters, that the accumulated weight of many small choices determines the future. The message I was asked to share is simple but profound. We are not separate from nature. We are part of it, woven into it, dependent on it. What we do to the earth, we do to ourselves. The health of the forests and rivers and oceans is our own health. Not something separate to be managed or exploited. Every species that disappears takes something irreplaceable with it. The wild places need protection, not because they're nice, but because they're necessary. We have a responsibility to be caretakers, not conquerors, healers, not exploiters, and there's still time, if enough of us wake up and remember and choose differently. That's what she wanted me to share. That's the truth I learned during those weeks in the wilderness, broken and helpless, cared for by a being that science says cannot exist. It's not about proving that Sasquatches are real, though they are. It's not about convincing skeptics or producing evidence for scientists to debate. It's about the message itself, the truth about connection and balance and responsibility that humans desperately need to remember. I think about her often, my teacher, my healer, my guide. I think about the patience she showed, caring for a stranger who belonged to a species that has done so much damage to the world she protects. I think about the hope she expressed, fragile but persistent, that humans might yet choose a different path. I think about her people, scattered through the wild places, watching and waiting, maintaining the old ways while hoping we'll remember ours. I never got her name, if her people even use names in the way we do. I never learned where exactly I was during those weeks in her care. The cave could be anywhere in those mountains, hidden in a maze of ridges and valleys that I couldn't navigate again even if I tried. That's how she wants it, I know. Her people's survival depends on remaining hidden, on avoiding the discovery that would bring humans flooding into their last refuges. But sometimes, late at night, when I'm lying in my tent under the stars, I feel a connection that transcends distance. I feel linked to her somehow, to all of her kind, part of a web of awareness that spans the wild places of the world. It's probably my imagination, probably just the memory of what I experienced playing tricks on my mind. But it feels real, and in a way that's what matters. The feeling of connection, of belonging to something larger than myself, of having a role and a purpose in the great web of life. That's what she gave me along with my life, and it's the greatest gift I've ever received.